Welcome to part 1 of my latest restoration series. This time it's going to be a Dumont RA113. And no, this is not actually my set. Not that I wouldn't mind owning this set. This actually belongs to someone fairly local to me. And I guess this set had been in his family for a long time. I guess they were the original owners. And he'd like to have it restored. Now, I don't normally do restorations for other people because I just have too many of my own sets. But for somebody local, if it's a set that they're sentimental about and really care about and will take good care of, sure, why not? Plus, I like working on Dumonts just because of the high build quality. So, here's a look inside. We've already pulled the chassis out. It's quite a beast. We had to lug it up my stairs, so getting the chassis out helped out a bit. So right now it's just the chassis with the picture tube installed. The finish on this is kind of interesting to me because it's virtually identical to the Sentinel 430 right behind it. This is blonde Carino wood, and I imagine this is made out of the same stuff. That's an African wood. I'm not sure if it's exactly exotic, but let's call it semi-exotic. It's kind of a yellowy finish put on top of it. So it's not a limed oak finish, in other words. It's higher quality than that. Having these doors, I imagine, help keep the insides in quite good condition. Those decals are in good shape. But anyways, what we care about is the electronics, because I'm not going to be doing anything to the cabinets. Now, my first concern was the picture tube. So as soon as we got it inside, I dug out my Suncor CR70 tester and checked it out. And I was a bit shocked at how good it tested. I had been told that it was a new picture tube. It's a Westinghouse 17 BP4. And I guess they hadn't watched it much after the new CRT was installed. And the set hadn't been turned on in decades. Well, this thing immediately sprang to life. Cutoff was off the scale, but I had full control over it. In other words, it wasn't a shorted picture tube or anything. And the emissions came up well into the green, and the life test, the needle didn't even budge. So we have no issues with this CRT. It's a Westinghouse 17 BP4 B. The B meaning it has, I think, a grayish tint to the front. And it's aluminized, so it'll be super bright and crisp. Which is great because the original actually was a 17 AP4. Which I only recently became aware of. They're very uncommon. I think maybe only Dumont and a few others used it. It was the first generation 17-inch picture tube, and I don't think it was aluminized. Impossible to find as well. What I'm a little bit puzzled by, though, is I heard that the 17 AP4 had a shorter neck. And the back on this, which they do have the original back for, is flush. There's no cup or anything for the CRT neck. I heard the 17 BP4 had a longer neck, so you would have to cut out a hole and put a plastic cap. And later versions of this set had that built in. Now, there's not a whole lot of clearance. It's almost flush with the back, so you know, I don't know. It fits, it works, that's the important thing. Speaker looks to be okay from what I can see. I haven't tested it yet. And here is the chassis. It's attached to a piece of plywood and slides out as an intact unit, so I will work on this on the workbench with a little 8-inch test CRT and leave this one here. I almost had them just take the cabinet back with them while I just worked on the chassis, but I figured it'd be nice to have the CRT here in case I need to make any adjustments to the ion trap or focus. Electromagnet, and also I wanted to have the original speaker because it's got the output transformer mounted on the frame. Alright, so this is my first look at the chassis. Corrosion free. This set was kept inside its whole life, so no worries there. Not too crazy about this. little electrical tape wrapped around the high voltage cord. Oh, I see a new one was spliced in. This is probably the original high voltage cord, and then there's this. Maybe I'll just replace the whole thing all the way back to the flyback. I wonder if the original CRT had a different connector on it. I know some of the early Dumont CRTs had like little acorn caps, or different type of high voltage connector than this, which is the more standard type. Well, I've got a few spare, so I could run a new one with long enough unbroken high voltage lead all the way to go into the cage, just to make it a little bit neater and safer. This has the continuous tuning, like most Dumont sets do with the I-tube. So it covers all the channels 2 through 13, and between channel 6 and 7 we've got the FM band, so this is also an FM radio. It's kind of neat to see these charts because you can see how the actual frequency spectrum is allocated. These gaps on here are because there really are gaps in the spectrum between these channels. They are not evenly spaced. And seems to be intact. Seems like there's a fine and a coarse. Probably a 3-to-1 reduction or thereabouts. And the line cords seem to be okay. I would not want to have to restring this. Alright, as for the rest of it, whole mess of tubes as you might expect, being Dumont. They did not cut any corners. These electrolytics hopefully won't be too bad. See, one of them is insulated from the chassis, so the outside of that is not grounded. Same with these guys. And that's a rather unusual way to mount a cap, so they're poking up here and the rest goes down into the chassis. Hopefully those won't be too much of a headache. Alright, now for the underside. Well, before we look underneath, I just noticed one kind of interesting design aspect. Horizontal output tube is not inside the high voltage cage. It's got its own little cylindrical metal shield here with a plate cap going right into here. And I suspect inside here it's a voltage doubler. Boy, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in here. Yeah, there are 2 high voltage rectifiers. I can just barely make out. One here and one here. Probably a bit of overkill, but that's typical Dumont. These CRTs running around 16,000 volts. And I've got other sets, like that Sentinel, that just use a single rectifier. The flyback transformers can easily put out 16,000 volts without the need for a voltage doubler. So I'm not sure why they would have gone to that extra expense and complication. This set doesn't quite want to balance on its own when I put it on its side, so it could be a little tricky to work on. Perhaps I'll end up removing it from this piece of wood. I'd rather not if I don't have to, though, but we'll see how that goes. Alright, now for the fun stuff, the insides. Okay, it's seen some servicing. Like that white cap down there is new, as is this black Sprague. Here's some of the original old waxy caps. Got a few Domino mica caps in there. Of course, old carbon composition resistors. Here's those 2 capacitors poking down from the top side. Somebody's added a fuse, which is a nice touch. Doubt that was original. Well, okay, well there's a 1/4 amp fuse for the flyback, which may be what that is, or that may be a fuse for the B+ somebody's added. I'm not sure. Another electrolytic hiding back in there. Some more wax caps on the controls. Then we get into the tuner, which is kind of sealed inside a metal box. And this is the IF up here. I guess I will have to take this board out because it's pretty cramped. Trying to work in around the edges of the chassis are going to be tough. Since I knew this project was coming up, I actually went ahead and already ordered a bunch of parts. Mostly high wattage resistors I didn't have on hand, and some oddball half-watt resistors I didn't have on hand, and a few electrolytics. There are a bunch in this set. I've been reading Phil Nelson's Restoration Diary. I'll leave a link in the description so you can see what's coming up on this project. I've been studying it, so I'll use his experience as a guide to working on this set. For example, he says that these two caps are pretty easy to work on. Just loosen up the clamps and they come right out. One is a 2 section and the other is a single section. And these seem to be a little more challenging to restuff. So we'll see how that goes. Also been studying the power supply a bit, and it's fairly complicated, and this power resistor is part of it. There's, I think, 5 or 6 key voltages, negative, positive, the big high wattage resistor chain, dividing it down with various taps. And there's some oddball values in there, so hopefully they're all good. Also was reading about the tuner in here. I have been incorrectly referring to these as induct tuners in my other sets. This is an induct tuner. The earlier ones in my other sets are called input tuners, I-N-P-U-T-U-N-E-R. I think that's how you would pronounce it, input tuner or input tuner. Those have 3 roller inductor sections. These have 4 inductor sections, but to minimize the space, the inductors are actually coiled in a vertical axis. And having that one extra coil, I guess, allows them to have a little bit more elaborate tuning mechanism, and they work better, so it'll be interesting to see. And luckily, mine is not gunked up. Phil's apparently was frozen, and he had to actually dismantle it and clean it. This, I'm hoping I can get away with just spraying maybe a little WD-40 and put some new grease into it, something like that. So that's a quick overview of this upcoming restoration project. I think it'll be quite interesting. But before I can dive into this, I need to get that GE810 off my workbench. I may have to just put the chassis back into the cabinet with some outstanding issues while I hunt down spare parts. And there's also that Admiral 30B1 I've been working on, and you'll see what I hope will be the wrap up to that project in an upcoming video, probably later tonight.